My son called on a Tuesday afternoon in early November, right when I was in the middle of hemming a dress for my neighbor's granddaughter. I remember that detail because I had pins in my mouth when the phone rang, and I had to set them down carefully on the arm of my chair before I could answer. 23 years as a seamstress will make you careful about where you put sharp things, Mom. That was all he said at first, just my name. The way he said it, I already knew something was coming. I'm here, I said. He cleared his throat. So Catherine and I have been talking about Christmas this year, about how we want to do things. Catherine is my daughter-in-law. They've been married for 11 years. I have tried for 11 years to love her the way you're supposed to love the woman your child chose. Some days it comes easy. Other days it takes work. That Tuesday was about to take a great deal of work. We're thinking of doing something different, my son said. More of a curated experience. Catherine's been in contact with a party planner, and we're going to do a formal sit-down dinner. Very elegant. Very, grown up. I waited. The thing is, he said, and his voice dropped half a register the way it used to when he was 16 and asking to borrow the car. We're not doing handmade gifts this year. There's going to be a gift exchange with a $200 minimum. And the dress code is cocktail attire. I looked at the dress on my lap. The pale blue fabric, the careful tucks I had been making by hand. I see, I said. It's nothing personal, Mom. It's just, Catherine's clients are going to be there. Her whole team from the firm. It matters to her that things look a certain way. There it was. And you're telling me this because? I asked, even though I already knew. He was quiet for a moment. Then, we thought it might be more comfortable for you to sit this one out. You'd have to buy something new to wear, and you know how the gift exchange works. It can get expensive. We just don't want you to feel out of place. Out of place. In my son's home on Christmas Day, in front of the tree I had watched him decorate as a child, his small hands reaching for the highest branches he could manage, asking me every year to lift him just a little higher. I understand, I said, because I did. I understood perfectly. We said goodbye. I put the phone down on the side table next to my pincushion and my sewing scissors, and the small framed photo of my son at age 7, grinning at the camera with a gap where his 2 front teeth used to be. I sat there for a long time. I am 64 years old. I have been sewing since I was 9, taught by my mother at a kitchen table in a house that no longer exists. I ran my own alteration shop for over 2 decades out of a storefront on Maple Street. I made my son's Halloween costumes every year until he was old enough to be embarrassed by the effort. I sewed the flower girl dresses for his wedding at Catherine's request, because she said a tailor would charge too much. And now I was not sophisticated enough for his Christmas dinner. I did not cry. I want to say that clearly. I am not a woman who falls apart easily, and I was not about to start. But I sat in that chair for a long time, holding the little blue dress in my lap, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Small. I felt very, very small. The next morning, I went next door to return a casserole dish I had borrowed 2 weeks earlier. My neighbor answered the door in her reading glasses, a book tucked under one arm. She is 81 years old, a widow, sharp as a tack, and she can tell when something is wrong before you've said a single word. She's been that way the entire 15 years I've lived on this street. Come in, she said, stepping back without being asked. I set the casserole dish on her kitchen counter and she poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if I wanted one. We sat at her kitchen table and I told her everything. The phone call, the party planner, Catherine's clients. Sit this one out. The whole thing. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I finished, she set down her mug and said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. "You could go," she said, "buy something expensive, show up, smile through it." I could. Or, she said, and there was something in her voice, a small, careful brightness, you could do what you actually want to do. I looked at her. What do I actually want to do? She shrugged one shoulder. I don't know, but I suspect you haven't let yourself think about it yet because you've been too busy feeling guilty about something that isn't your fault. I drove home thinking about that. What did I actually want? I wanted Christmas to feel like Christmas. I wanted to spend it with people who wanted to be there. I wanted a house full of noise and mismatched plates and too much food and someone falling asleep on the couch before dessert. I wanted the kind of holiday that leaves you tired in a good way, the kind where you go to bed that night and your cheeks hurt from smiling. I had not had that kind of Christmas in years. Not since my son moved across town and started building a different life, a polished life, a life where nothing was ever out of place. I picked up the phone, not to call my son. I called my friend from church instead, a retired school teacher who had mentioned in September that she didn't know what she was doing for the holidays because her sister was traveling. "What are you doing for Christmas?" I asked her. "Nothing yet," she said. "Come to my house," I said. "I'm having people over." There was a pause. "How many people?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But I'm going to find out." I spent the next week making phone calls. I called a woman from my Tuesday morning sewing circle whose husband had passed away in March and who I knew would spend Christmas alone unless someone intervened. I called my former employee, a young man I'd hired fresh out of vocational school 8 years ago, who still called me every few months to ask for advice, and who was spending his first Christmas in a new city after a divorce. I called the family who had moved in 3 houses down in August. A young couple with 2 kids under 5 who had mentioned, once, that all their family was back in Ohio. I called a college student from my church who had posted on the community board looking for a place to go for the holidays because she couldn't afford the flight home. One call led to another. My friend from church mentioned that her neighbor, a man in his 70s who had recently had knee surgery, had nowhere to go. The young couple knew another young couple in the same situation. The college student said her roommate was also staying in town. By the second week of November, I had 15 people coming to my house for Christmas. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started making lists. I did not hire a caterer. I did not call a party planner. I made a grocery list instead, the kind I used to make when my son was small, and Christmas dinner meant 2 kinds of pie and a ham big enough to last 4 days. I added a standing rib roast because I'd always wanted to make one and never had a good enough reason. I added a green bean casserole and twice-baked potatoes and a sweet potato dish with the marshmallows on top that nobody admits to liking but everyone takes 2 helpings of. I also made a different kind of list. I went through my fabric stash. I had been collecting material for years, ends of bolts, remnants from finished projects, good fabric I'd bought on sale without a plan. I pulled out everything I had and sorted it by weight and color and thought about what I could make. I started sewing. A table runner in deep red cotton for my dining room table. Cloth napkins in a green and cream plaid, 12 of them, hemmed by hand. A small stocking for each person coming. Personalized, because it is the kind of thing I know how to do, and because I wanted everyone who walked into my house to feel like they had been expected, specifically by name. I made a quilted centerpiece for the table out of fabric scraps. It wasn't fancy. It was made from a flannel shirt that used to belong to my late husband, a piece of curtain fabric from the house I grew up in that I had saved for no good reason, and a cotton print I had been given by a customer years ago as a thank you gift. I had been saving that fabric for something worthy, and this, I decided, was it. My neighbor came over one evening while I was cutting pieces and sat at my kitchen table drinking tea and watching me work. "You seem better," she said. "I am better," I said. "Are you still sad?" I thought about it. "A little," I said. "But it's a different kind of sad. More like missing something that used to be there. Not like being blindsided." She nodded. She understood that difference. She had lived with it for years, since her husband passed. "Your son doesn't know what he's missing," she said. "He will," I said, and then I stopped, because I hadn't planned to say that and I wasn't sure what I meant by it. She raised an eyebrow. "Not because I want him to suffer," I said carefully. "Just, he will, eventually, understand what he chose. And I hope by then he still has the option to choose differently." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very gracious thing to say." "I'm working on it," I told her. My son called twice in the weeks before Christmas. The first time he asked if I was doing okay, and I said yes, I was fine, I was keeping busy. He sounded relieved, which told me he had expected guilt, had maybe wanted it a little, the way people sometimes want the thing they've chosen to be validated by the pain it causes. I didn't give him that. The second time he called, he mentioned, almost casually, that Catherine's firm was sending some very important clients to the dinner, and that they were hoping to close a deal that had been in the works for months. I said that sounded stressful, and I hoped it went well. He seemed surprised. He had expected something else from me, I think. I'm not sure what. Christmas morning, I was up at 6. I had prepped most things the day before. The roast was marinated and ready. The potatoes were half cooked. The pies were already made and sitting on the counter. A lemon meringue and a chocolate chess pie, because those were the ones I knew how to make without thinking. The house smelled like cinnamon from the ornament sachets I had made out of scrap fabric and clove-studded oranges on the windowsills, because my mother had always done it that way. My neighbor arrived first, at 11, carrying a bottle of sparkling cider and a tin of shortbread she had made from a Scottish recipe her own mother had taught her. She walked in the door and looked at the table, set with my mismatched china, the handmade runner down the center, the cloth napkins folded beside each plate, a small stocking hanging from each chair back. And she stopped walking. "Oh," she said. "Just that." I helped her with her coat. People arrived in waves after that. My friend from church brought 2 bottles of wine and her famous cranberry relish, and gave me a long hug in the doorway that said more than either of us put into words. My former employee showed up 20 minutes later with his girlfriend, who I had not known he was bringing but who jumped in immediately to help carry things from the kitchen without being asked, which told me everything I needed to know about her. The young family from down the street arrived with 2 small children in matching sweaters, the older one solemn and wide-eyed at all the strangers, the younger one already reaching for the low ornaments on my tree before she had even taken off her coat. The college student came with her roommate, both of them a little shy at first, both of them visibly relaxing by the time they had been handed mugs of hot cider. The man with the bad knee sat in the armchair by the window and held court in the way that only people who have been alive long enough to have genuinely interesting stories can do. The 2 young couples who didn't know each other before that day ended up in the kitchen talking about their kids for 40 minutes and exchanged numbers before dinner. Dinner itself was exactly what I had wanted it to be. It was loud. Someone's child knocked over a glass of cider and everyone laughed instead of minding. The man by the window told a story about his time in the Merchant Marine that had the whole table leaning forward. My friend's cranberry relish was passed around 3 times. I had made enough food for 20, and we ate like we were all trying to prove it. After dessert, after 2 slices of chocolate chess pie had been eaten by people who claimed they were full, after the lemon meringue was gone except for the piece I had set aside for my neighbor who I knew would want it later, after the children had fallen asleep on the couch under a blanket I had made from a kit years ago and never had occasion to actually use, after all of that, I sat at the table with the remains of the meal around me and felt a quiet in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Not emptiness, the opposite of emptiness. My phone rang at 6:30 in the evening. I almost didn't recognize the number. I answered anyway. It was my son. "Mom." His voice was different than it had been in weeks. Flat. Tired. "Is everything all right?" I asked. A pause. The dinner didn't go well. I waited. The clients canceled this afternoon. 2 hours before the reservation. Some kind of conflict with another firm. I don't know all the details, Catherine's handling it. But they pulled out. And then the party planner had a situation with one of the other vendors and he stopped. It was a mess. It's still a mess. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "We're sitting here with all this food," he said, and his voice cracked just slightly. "Catherine's upset. I've been trying to, I don't know. I should have called earlier." I looked around my own dining room. At the cloth napkins, most of them wrinkled now from being used. At the quilt centerpiece with its mixed fabric, flannel shirt, curtain scrap, cotton print, slightly off-center after the shuffle of serving dishes. At the stocking with my son's name on it, hanging from the empty chair at the corner of the table, the one I had set and then removed the place setting from 3 weeks ago, and rehung the stocking on anyway. Just in case. "I've leftovers," I said. Silence. "There's most of a standing rib roast," I said, 2 baked potatoes, half a lemon meringue pie, You and Catherine are welcome to come. More silence. Mom, I'm not asking you to apologize tonight, I said. I'm just telling you there's food here and the door is open. He came. Catherine did not, which I had half expected and did not take personally. Not that night anyway. My son sat down at my table with a plate of food in front of him and looked around at the remnants of the day. The sleepy children on the couch, my neighbor in her chair with her tea. The general comfortable disorder of a party recently ended, and something moved across his face that I didn't try to name. He ate 2 plates. After we sat in the living room with the lights low and the tree lit up, and he didn't say much, and neither did I. But before he left, he stood in the doorway and looked at the stocking on the chair with his name stitched across the top in red. You made that, he said. I did. Even after yes, I said, even after. He left around 9. I stood at the door and watched his car until it turned the corner. My neighbor was still there, dozing lightly in the armchair. I sat back down at the table and looked at the mess, the good evidence of living mess, and thought about what my son had said and what he hadn't and what might still come later in some conversation we hadn't had yet. I don't know what happens from here with my son. I don't know if that conversation is coming soon or years from now or somewhere in between. I know that I love him the way I have always loved him, completely and sometimes painfully and without the ability to stop. I know that I will keep his stocking, I will keep his chair at my table. But I also know something I didn't know on that Tuesday in November, when I was sitting in my chair with pins in my mouth and a phone in my hand, feeling small. I know that my worth is not something that gets assigned by dress codes or $200 minimums or client dinners or party planners. It is not measured by whether my china matches or my centerpiece came from a designer. It lives in the cloth napkins hemmed by hand, and in the leftovers that were still warm when my son needed them, and in the stocking with his name on it that I made anyway, even when I was angry, even when I was hurt, because that is the kind of mother I am. That is the kind of woman I am. That is the kind of woman I am. I am not going to apologize for that anymore, not to anyone. I've thought a lot about that phone call in November, the one where my son told me, gently, carefully, as if he were doing me a favor, that I would feel out of place at my own son's Christmas table. What strikes me now, looking back, is how quietly that kind of thing works on you. Nobody says you are not enough. They just rearrange the guest list. They just mention the dress code. They just suggest, so reasonably, that you sit this one out. And somehow you end up sitting alone in a chair holding a dress you were making for someone else's granddaughter, wondering when you became the kind of woman who needed to be managed. I think that is what happens when we stop trusting what we know to be true about ourselves and start borrowing other people's measurements instead. My son did not invent my smallness that day. He just handed me a mirror that Catherine had been holding for a while, and I made the mistake of looking into it. The thing about cause and effect, the real, honest version of it, not the fairy tale kind, is that it rarely announces itself. Catherine's client dinner did not fall apart because of anything I did. I did not wish for it. I did not want my son sitting at my table on Christmas night looking tired and a little lost. What happened to them happened because of the choices they had been making long before that phone call. You cannot build a holiday around a business deal and then be surprised when the deal falls through and takes the holiday with it. That is simply the shape of things. What you put at the center of something determines what holds and what doesn't. I put people at the center of my Christmas. Imperfect, mismatched, showed up with sparkling cider and shortbread people. A man with a bad knee who could still make a whole table lean in. 2 young couples who had been strangers at noon and were exchanging phone numbers by dessert. A college student who looked like she might cry when she saw the little stocking with her name on it hanging from the chair back. That is what held. I am not a perfect mother. I have made mistakes with my son that I think about more than he probably knows. But I know how to show up. I know how to set a place at the table and mean it. I know how to make something with my hands that says, I thought about you specifically. I made this for you. You were worth the time. That is not a small thing. I spent years treating it like it was, deferring to other people's ideas of what counted as worthy, what qualified as enough. I am done with that. The intelligence I have is not the kind that impresses clients at a formal dinner. It lives in knowing which fabric holds up through a winter, and in remembering that my neighbor takes her pie with tea instead of coffee, and in understanding that what a person who is alone on Christmas actually needs is not pity, but a stocking with their name on it and a chair that was set for them on purpose. That is a kind of knowing. It took me 64 years to stop apologizing for it. My son came back. I believe he will keep coming back, and that slowly, and the way these things happen, he will find his way to understanding what he almost threw away. I am not waiting for an apology. I am just keeping his chair at the table and his stocking on the hook because that is who I am, and I have decided that who I am is enough. It always was.